What's up, my brothers? I have a clip here from Dan Bilzerian talking about marriage and whether or not he would ever do it. I also have some context to add beyond that and some possible solutions to remove some of the doubt and risk that's involved for guys. Let's get right into the video first, and then we'll add the other stuff.
Would you ever get married?
That is less likely. As a gambler, betting half your net worth, you're going to love a chick forever. Usually a relationship is like two magnets. One magnet, if you get too close, the other magnet pushes away. The same way into the side. If you've got one person that's a little bit more into the relationship of the other, which is usually the case, it's very rare that everybody's like equally in it. What happens is when you get locked in like that, now you have to ask the government permission to break up. The person that was less locked in sometimes feels more trapped. And then the person that's been trying really hard to keep that person that's maybe like above their pay grade stops trying quite so hard. There's a little bit of animosity that builds up. When you're not married and the other person doesn't act right, your girl starts flirting with another dude, I'm out the door, right? But if I'm married to this and now I got to give permission from the government and give her half of my I'm going to pull up a little bit more floating, right? But that's going to come with animosity.
All right, guys. So Dan Bilzerian, the world's biggest playboy, and, well, he's been questioned for a lot of things lately, but we'll set aside everything else and all the comments you have about his haircut. But what he's talking about is pretty much spot on. If you're new to the channel, I'm Rich Cooper, entrepreneur, best-selling author, relationship expert. I wrote a book called The Unplugged Alpha. There's a chapter in the book that deals with marriage. There's some significant flaws with it in the West as it exists in most states and provinces. I'm going to go through those with you right now. We'll hit the road and I'll talk about a few of the fixes as well along the way that could potentially remedy or reduce the risk level that you might need to endure. But he's right. When he talks about the magnets and pushing and pulling, what he's really talking about is the leave-or and the leavee dynamic, also known as the adorer and the adored. There's always somebody that likes the other more, right? If one of you two want to untie the knot, and usually women marry up because they're hypergamous, so they look for the better, bigger deal, like the best guy that they can get, who's usually, that's why, Stacy, the hairdresser making $40,000 a year, will marry Steve from VP accounting team at the great big accounting firm making, $300,000-$400,000 a year. Very, very common. But if she wants to leave and she no longer adores him and wants to untie the knot, we have some problems here. First things first, number one, false DV charges. It's not that uncommon for women to point at a guy and say, big scary man, he threatened me, whatever. She'll call the police. In some cases, she'll even bruise herself, hit herself with something. I had a friend of mine that his wife cheated on him, and he basically, during a conflict, when they were contemplating to break up, basically pointed her in the face and said, "You're a liar." That sparked a false DV charge and had him removed from the house. So the removal of you as the guy from the household with a false allegation, and most often than not, I'm not saying all the time, but most often not, they're usually false with nothing behind them. But because big man scary or vulnerable woman, the law or the authorities will generally side with her and take you away in cuffs. And in some cases, guys come back after a couple of days and the locks are changed and she went to a lawyer and she filed a restraining order, some other nonsense, and now you can't see the kids and now you don't have access to the house. And now you don't have a say in when the house sells. So there's a lot of things in that veritable ecosystem that become significant problems. I'm not going to get into all the details in this. I'm sort of trying to want to expand and frame it a little bit better from what Dan said in that video. But that's the first thing, is you got false DV charges, which are reasonably common, okay? The next thing is how women behave in divorce. And there's three main things that encourage women to behave very badly. There's alimony or maintenance, whatever it is you want to call it. There's child support, and there's the division of assets. Alimony or maintenance is basically prescribed based on the differential in the income over a period of time, if I can break it down that way. So if you've been married for 10, 15 years, she was a stay-at-home mom, popped out 3 kids, they're all in school, she decides get her body back, go to yoga, starts banging the instructor and says that she wants to untie the knot. 10 to 15 years later, her argument is then going to be, well, I need alimony and maintenance because he's been maintaining my life like this and my prior skills as whatever it is she did before are no longer valid. She was a receptionist at an insurance company or did nails or whatever the hell it was, and I need him to take care of me. So when you get married, you have to understand, again, women are hypergamous, they marry up, so you bring them up to this level. When she wants to untie the knot and leave you, regardless of whether or not you want to leave her or she wants to leave you, or you come home one day and you find her banging another dude in your matrimonial bed, it doesn't matter. Family law makes sure that she maintains a standard. The longer you've been married and the more that she has to give up, i.e., oh, poor judge, I had to stay home and raise a kid, so I had to give up my career So I need his money? No. They're always strong and independent in the marriage, but when they're before a family court and a judge, they're no longer strong and independent, and they need his money. So alimony and maintenance are certainly a real deal. In some places, it's prescribed over a period of time, and other places it can be for life. But most cases, she doesn't. Like, she'll just date around and never remarry if the deal that she had before was better, but she has access to new guys that might be hotter, younger, whatever. So there's alimony. There's child support. Child support, the problem with that is it's not based on what the child's needs are. The child's needs monthly might equate to $1,257 based on receipts and bills and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't matter. If you're a strong income earner, you make $15,000, $20,000 a month, you're a doctor, you're a surgeon, you're a licensed professional, CEO, whatever, you make good money, then they take your income, they plug it into a chart, and it spits out a number, and it says, okay, 3 kids, you're paying $12,787 a month. That's probably not what the kids need to live off of. That's not for their basic needs, but it's what the charts say. It doesn't go to the kids. The vast majority of it goes to her handbags, her Range Rover lease that she picks up when she upgrades the vehicle, all kinds of stuff. So just keep that in mind. There's a child support component, which I'm all for if it goes for what the child needs, but beyond that, gals, you're strong and independent. Why aren't we standing on our own 2 feet and just taking what the child actually needs for the time that they're with you? And then there's, of course, the division of assets. The division of assets is what you brought into the marriage. And, you basically take your stuff that you brought into marriage, you put it in a pile, her stuff, you put it in a pile, slice it down the middle, you take half, he takes half. Or she takes half, you take half, whatever. And that's just how it works in most places. I'll talk about a prenup and postnup in a moment to sort of hedge that. But in most cases, that's how it goes. As time, like even if you have a prenup, let's say, and as time passes, let's say you're married for 15 years, she gave up her career, she raised kids, then usually what ends up happening is like the prenup isn't worth the paper it's written on. It's basically toilet paper at that point. So the longer you've been married, the more time that has passed, the less valuable it is to the untying of the knot. The closer it is to the matrimonial date, to the nuptials, the better off you are to be able to present it and say, hey, we have a prenup, let's protect the assets. And the other thing, and I can get on the road to talk about these other ones, is how women are encouraged to behave poorly in the divorce process. I should more specifically say how women are encouraged to divorce, more specifically. So I remember having this conversation with a commenter on one of my videos, this was years ago, and she was talking about marriage and how she was sort of comparing notes with her girlfriend from work. And she was married, husband, dual income household, couple kids, and she was sort of comparing her notes to a colleague at work, exact same position, Becky from HR, Stacy from HR, same role, same yada, yada, yada. So there's really not a huge difference in that. And what they discovered when the gals were comparing notes, as women do, was that the single lady that was divorced, with her alimony, child support, government subsidies, food stamps, whatever she was collecting collectively, was about, I think it was $1,500. It was significant. It was like $1,500 to $2,000 more a month than the married couple. So the lady that was commenting in that specific video, she's like, the law and the way that the world is structured actually encourages women to leave men, to leave families, to become single mothers, because there's more money in it for them. Because of alimony, child support, government subsidies, housing subsidies, food stamp subsidies. There's all these mechanisms and things that come into play to make sure that the gals are looked after and they don't have to worry about anything. So she was essentially angry and frustrated that she found herself in a position where she did the right thing. She got married, she stayed with her husband, she raised a family, they co-parented together, they loved each other, blah, blah, blah. And she found out that she was punished and her friend at work was rewarded for being a single mom. So there's that problem as well too. Women aren't exactly encouraged to stay in a marriage, to stay in a cohabitating type of scenario. They don't like you, they get frustrated by you, there's something in the relationship, her mother-in-law bothers her, something like that, whatever. She sprained her eye looking at a disco ball or something like that, and it's like, I want to get out. Or they watch Eat, Pray, Love one time with their girlfriends and drink some wine and they're like, maybe I should untie the knot. So any number of things can come up later on down the line that would encourage her to change her stance and or her commitment to you in that relationship. So just keep that in mind. So let's talk about some fixes to this very real problem that men face. Because I know a lot of guys, they often ask me, they'll call in my podcast, what's the best way to minimize risk? How do I get married? All that sort of stuff. And there's an entire chapter in my book that deals with why smart men don't marry and offers some reasonable remedies. I'm not going to go through every single one in this video, but what I am going to do is I'm going to go through some of the main ones. If you want to get all the details, you should definitely hop into the link below, pinned to the top comment, and grab a copy of the Unplugged Alpha. You'll be pleasantly surprised with the completeness of all the information that's in there. All right, potential fixes. So the first thing is live live where custody is default 50-50. Now, this one is a weird one. It's very straightforward to me, and I think it makes absolute sense, but the vast majority of guys that I talk to, especially when I follow up with them, especially on private consults and stuff like that, they don't do it. And I don't know why. Like, it just makes sense. So there's a website called the National Parenting Organization. You can Google it. They publish a brand new report card every year. I've had one of their directors on my podcast before. They're probably one of the best structured organizations dealing with these issues that matter to fathers. And what they do with this report card is they'll grade all of the states. And they also take a look at legislation and everything coming down the pipeline later on down the road. But they'll give the states a grade based on their current status and whether or not they essentially offer default 50-50. The argument is, if you have to untie the knot and you're a father and you love your children, which I assume most of you do, you're going to want to see them and you're going to want to share custody, so it's basically shared. One parent, the next parent, 1 week on, 1 week off, or something amounting to something that resembles that at least. So what the National Parenting Organization did is they rated the states, and they'll tell you which states are good and which states are bad. At the time of recording this, I haven't looked at it for a few months, but I think, Kentucky, Florida, Michigan, even California's default 50-50, surprisingly. And then all the other states sort of like slide downhill from there. So you can go take a look at that and Google it for yourself. But if you want to get married and you want to have kids, the entire benefit for fathers as men is to sire their children, name your sons, give them your last name, and carry on your DNA, to leave your legacy behind, right? Like, isn't that the point? Well, what's the point having kids if you have to fight tooth and nail through family court, usually because women are rewarded richly for doing things like going for primary custody of the kids? Because guess what? Primary custody, they get more child support. So they're rewarded to behave badly, to basically alienate the kids from the father or steal the kids from the father. So you have to be aware of these things. So why would you go and have kids in a state that hates dads? Move to a state that likes fathers. Very simple. And that removes one of the main hurdles that often come out of divorce and the acrimony and the fighting, and it's just nonsense, right? You can get rid of a lot of it by living somewhere that doesn't actually hate dads, and it's like, you don't have to have that fight. We're going to share custody and that's it. There's no, well, I'm going to have the kids all the time sort of thing, right? We talked earlier about prenups and postnups. Let's dive down that rabbit hole. They are generally good. A lot of lawyers will say they're better than good, but what they don't usually remind you is that they're good the closer you are to the nuptial date. If you get married and 3 years later you say, fuck this, I'm out, it's not worth it, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to make an unhappy bitch happy or something like that. If you get to that point and you have a prenup and even a postnup is something you sign after the nuptials that basically says, yes, I absolutely agree with everything I said before I do and after I do. It's just a little more concrete, Talk to a family lawyer about whether or not that's a valuable step to take where you live. Buy their time, hey, you live in a certain state, contact a family lawyer, because if you're going to get a prenup anyway, you might as well have the conversation. What does it look like in a state? If I have to untie the knot, what are the best ways to protect myself? Any other mechanisms I can put in place, structure assets, whatever. Do it all before you go and get married if you're going to do some crazy shit like that. By the way, I'm going to state this because maybe it hasn't been obvious yet, but you can avoid all of this nonsense by not living in a way that looks like marriage to the government. I'm not saying don't have kids. I'm not saying don't love a woman. You can certainly love a woman, you can certainly have children, and you don't necessarily have to live in a way that looks like marriage to the government. The problem is a lot of women understand the benefits of marriage, and if it doesn't work out, then they're fully protected. It's a nice insurance policy, so that's why a lot of them push for it, and that's why guys are like, well, okay, let's do that, baby. And they don't really think it through, right? It's probably one of the biggest, most important decisions you'll ever make in your life as a guy, and a lot of people don't think through it properly. They'll just go ahead and just, we'll just sign it and have a ceremony and blah, 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 and it all goes to shit after that. So prenup, postnup, talk to a family lawyer. Again, it's more useful closer to the date of the nuptials if you have to untie the knot. So if you realize into the marriage, like once you start seeing obvious signs like this sucks, this is not improving, you might want to think about untying the knot and plan for it properly. By the way, I wrote a guide called The Unplugged Alpha's Guide to Divorce. It's less than a $200 course. It's very detailed. I went through it with my family lawyer to make sure it was as complete as possible. So if you ever are contemplating untying the knot as a guy, prepare for it properly. I'll put a link for that below in the top comment. Next point I put, which is also in the book, it expands further in there, but don't marry too far down. So what does that mean? Women are hypergamous. We talked about this earlier. Stacy, the hairdresser, will marry Steve from accounting, the VP, making $300,000 a year, right? if you're choosing a mate selection is really important, and who's going to be the mother of your children, who's going to be your wife, if that's something that you want to do, you should really only do it with somebody that isn't that far beneath you. Okay, if you're an entrepreneur making $150,000 a year, you marry a lawyer making $150,000 a year, you're in pretty good space. Like, you're in a pretty good spot if you have to untie the knot. You're not going to have to pay alimony. You're equal earners. You know, there's no really much to fight about in that area. So if you live in a state that doesn't hate fathers and you don't marry too far down, then that kind of removes most of the barriers to your problems dealing with marriage. There's other problems that come with marriage, by the way: proximity, familiarity, exclusivity. These are all the itties that contribute to the deterioration of a relationship. I've talked about these in other videos and podcasts. Maybe I'll break it down again in the future, but you get the idea, right? Like, just understand, don't marry too far down. It's a bit of a protective measure. The more equal you are, the better, but you're also going up against female nature. Female nature wants to marry up, higher up, more significantly up. They don't generally like to marry their equals. They want to look up to a giant, if I can put it that way. Absolutely, positively no feminists. They are going to be your worst enemy in the divorce grinder, in the divorce machine. And don't think because she's got long, beautiful hair and she's feminine and she goes to church every weekend that won't change later on down the road. I've lost count of the consults that I've had with men fighting tooth and nail, grinding through the divorce machine with a woman that came from an intact family, conservative. Dad was a gun-toting conservative with dozens and dozens of guns, and they went to church all the time, and she's got 7 siblings, and her parents are together, and her siblings are together, and she ends up working in HR in some woke company, dyes her hair purple, cuts it short, gets obese, and then all of a sudden wants to untie the knot because she needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. And the dude is looking at his wife going, what the hell happened? What happened to the beautiful, feminine, agreeable chick that I had before? She's now an insufferable feminist. Any woman that identifies with any feminist values should be avoided at all costs, guys. It's one of the red flags in my book. There's 21 red flags in total. Get familiar with them. Pin below in the top comment. Understand the red flags and do not invite women into your life that contain many of them. All right, and the last one that I jotted down here is seek the bright triad traits: clarity, stability, and maturity. I expand on that in full detail in a chapter of the book. You also want to avoid the dark triad traits. Your best bet is grab the book, dive down the rabbit hole, get into all of it. And if you ever have a question, call into my podcast. I'm live on the Unplugged Alpha podcast channel, and I'm happy to take care of that. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you guys think. I hope you have an awesome day. Peace out.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough,